it take to 10x your business while still putting people first? Our guest today is Kurt Uhlir. He is a globally recognized 10x marketer, an operator, and speaker. He has built and run businesses from startup to over 500 million in annual revenues, assembled teams across 6 continents, and been part of a small team leading an $880 million IPO, and has participated in dozens of acquisitions. So he really knows what it takes to grow businesses big. And what I love about Kurt's approach is that at the heart of the growth is his commitment to servant leadership, putting people first. And we're going to talk about that here today. He's got a bit of a different take on it, and I know it's going to be awesome. So Kurt, welcome to the Leaders Transformation. We're glad you're here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. And before we start, I always like to do a shout out. Sometimes I forget, but I always like to make a point of doing a shout out to those who support this show. And Laura Cook from Podcast Bookers, we want to thank her because she's the one who gave us this opportunity by introducing us. So thank you, Laura, for all the great work that you and your team do. So with that, let's talk a little bit about your background. I mean, if I sat here and read it all, I'd be here all day. So just give us a little bit of the background from your perspective, what's important to you, and kind of what got you here today.
Yeah, it starts really, you mentioned operator. I didn't mean to, but I ended up forming 2 LLCs when I was 14 because I was really good at selling and building systems. And so we ended up selling one of those companies later. The other one's still going on today, not doing so well. But if I look back, I didn't know what I was good at. I just, I was good at selling. I was good at meeting people's needs. And I kind of stumbled into this place though, really when I came out of college where we don't think about it now. Everything we do is tagged to a location somewhere. There's Google Maps on our phones, take us everywhere. But I was at this little company, I say little, it was 85 million a year in revenue, but called Navtech, became Here Technologies. And so they were the maps behind MapQuest back in the day, Garmin's, car navigation systems around the world. And so we grew that company from $85 million a year in revenue to 1.44 billion in 10 and a half years. And from 2000 on, we think about all the places that have spatial data. And so what I ended up being really good at was seeing systems and controlling risk almost no matter the industry, because so many places from Microsoft back there on the shelf, Microsoft Flight Simulator uses that data to car navigation system or FedEx Logistics, and they all use it completely differently. And so that kind of created me into this little spot where I'm able to see systems and things that have the capability of scaling.
Got it. So your focus on servant leadership is, like you said, it's a little bit different than what most people think about servant leadership. So let's define it the way you define it, and then we can unpack it from there.
Yeah. So, I think too many people complicate leadership into different styles. And so for me, it's really very binary. You have an autocratic leadership style. And so that's do what I say, how I say to do it, or at the end of the day, there's the door, you can be fired. And the other side says, from a servant leadership perspective, says, hey, look, my job as a leader is to define the outcomes I would like at the company, and then to spend the rest of my time figuring out how to serve those people that work for me and choose to work for me so that they can help me and the company accomplish our goals. And so when you kind of take that approach, then everything else is just a flavor within those two. And I didn't kind of mean to kind of come into that way. I used to be very much the autocratic leader, but I've kind of realized that so much, like, if you want to scale things, there's a lot of things you're wrong about. And unless you're open to the people that are out there actually serving customers day in and day out, sole contributors, those leading those people, you're never going to realize all the false assumptions that you have in your head that are holding back you and your company.
So how do you figure out what are the things that you're wrong about? You're alluding to having the right people on the team, but even how do you get those people on the team? Maybe is a question, even a pre-question to that.
You hire differently than how most people hire, and you spend a lot more time once they're on staff rather than just putting them straight into work, but helping them understand the outcomes you're wanting to accomplish for that quarter, that year, maybe that decade, even that if you're that long term. But most people, whether they're a small business or they're a $50 million SaaS company, they tend to hire people. At the end of the day, they say they're hiring for culture, but what they're really hiring for, if you dig into it, I find they're hiring somebody that they want to hang out with on the weekends or go to dinner with or have over for a barbecue. And that's very different from a culture perspective than I believe, like, I'm always going to hire. I put this actually in on my applications when I'm hiring for people in the job description. I want people that they have a bias towards action. It's cultural traits that you would see in how the person shows up at work. I want somebody that has a bias towards action. When there's a problem, there's a customer need, they're going to jump in and want to fix it. They're not just going to wait for the boss to tell them what to do. I want people that are really strong in healthy conflict and that aren't scared away when saying, hey, our company thrives in healthy conflict. And then we can unpack that. And then I really want people that have a strong opinion held loosely. And that could be somebody that's straight out of college or somebody, one of us, that's been working for 30 years in the marketplace, but like, hey, this is how we've done it repeatedly, but I might be wrong. And I want to hear those superhero stories from their past that's going to come out. And then I'm going to take a lot of time in the first week or two when somebody comes on board, explaining the outcomes that the company's trying to reach and how this individual role we're trying to put you into, how this role and what I'm asking you to do is going to help the company accomplish those roles.
So when I think about school and I think about how school conditions people to conform and be good employees, the skills that you're talking about, the qualities that you're talking about are the opposite of that in many cases. So
Absolutely.
do you ever find yourself you got to like unteach people these skills and like give them the freedom, the permission? I feel like there's just so many people that are just needing that permission to be themselves and to
Yeah,
step out and have that courage.
I like to joke, even people that have been on my team for 2 years or 3 years, something will still bubble up some point. And there's basically this PTSD from some bad boss, whether it's school or they had this toxic boss before, or they had a boss who was super nice, but just led through authority, and something will bubble up and you're like, whoa, what happened there? And you have to create an environment to allow them to answer that, first of all. But it does come from some cases you can identify it. So once you hire your first couple people and you start hiring for people the way that I talked about, they will bring other people to your team. And so which it way reduces the cost of hiring new people and it increases your retention. People want to stay at a company like that. But a lot of it comes from repeatedly going back and saying, hey, like one of my jobs as a leader is to point out where I'm wrong. And so that's kind of the key thing is like, it's not just what you say. It's not the words on the website. It is, but like I bring up, like usually I have an all staff meeting, everybody that reports underneath me, whatever organization I'm at, every Monday. And at least every other meeting, I'm going to bring up, hey, the words for those cultural traits on the website are not for new hires. They're for you to hold me accountable to as well. And so I'm reminding people to say, hey, if those actions, if you're not seeing them in me, you have permission to set up a one-on-one and call me out on that. So that's, most bosses don't do that. Most leaders don't do that. And then I come back to people where mention like, if I know I'm wrong, like I guarantee everybody that's in a leadership role, every individual contributor, you're wrong about 3 things in your business right now, and you don't know it. And I say that because historically, when I look back at any time, I'm uncovering things that I thought was a great decision, not just a good decision, a great decision 6 months or a year before. And we make those decisions because we think it's a good decision. And so, but a wrong decision and a good decision feel exactly the same until the data says that this was a wrong decision. And so when those things get uncovered, I try not to bring it up when it's the team, but when I was the one making that decision or a big part of that decision, it's your job as the leader to bring that out into those all hands meetings and show people, I don't get this right all the time. And when you do that, people start being willing to try things. They'll come to you when they just have a gut feeling about something, or when they're actually wrong or messed up with a client. And some cases they'll bring it up in the team meeting if you ask the right questions. And you'd much rather know that now than 6 weeks later when the client fires you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this because so many of the conversations, especially that I've had recently, are about this idea that leaders are getting it wrong and they don't know they're getting it wrong. That seems to be this reoccurring theme. So, of course, I'm asking myself, what am I getting wrong? Of course, because if it's coming up, but it's a really good point because so many leaders think they need to have the right answers and
Right.
that they need to be the one that everybody comes to when things go wrong. They've got to navigate through crisis. They've got to lead their people and lead the charge. But what you're talking about is what I'm hearing is this collaborative lead the charge. It's this collaborative action. And so, how do you How do you create that type of environment? And still, at the same time, there are some decisions you need to make that really come down to you saying, this is the way we're going.
Yeah, great question. I mean, you as the leader, whether you lead a small team, a division, or the whole company, it is your responsibility to lead people through those decisions and those crises. But how you lead is different between whether you're authoritative versus are you the facilitator for helping the team come together and say, hey, let's remember what the outcomes we all agreed on that we're trying to reach this quarter and this year. And here's the decision in mind. And how should we be looking at this? What are we not considering? And so you're leading through facilitating that conversation and bringing up things as well. I tend to come in from an audit perspective and say, hey, look, if I come into a large team and they're wanting to figure this out and look for those inflection points, I'm going to really dig in. And for the next couple of weeks with that leader, and we're going to go through all of the small and bigger decisions that they make or they think are made in the organization. And usually what happens is even though they're the nicest person, especially those that come from a faith background, they actually end up realizing that they're an authoritative leader versus this facilitator. And when they have to realize that, because when they realize it about themselves, it allows them to show up differently and say, hey, you need to show up with your team and remind them of the outcome. You need to point out the decisions to be made, and you need to provide an environment for people to step up. I mean, my one-on-ones and especially smaller team meetings, I finish up every call. In some cases, I'll start them by saying, what am I not paying attention to today? Or what is the team not paying attention today that you think we should be paying attention to? And like we tend to use a kind of a joint agenda app to allow questions and templating. And I'll even add in there like some notes for people, especially those new to the team. This can be a gut feeling. You do not have to have data on it yet. If you have data, bring it. We want to hear that. But often just reminding people, you may have a gut feeling about something's going sideways or we're not paying attention to something. And when you bring that up repeatedly, especially on one-on-ones, then over time you start shifting the whole team. Because if you've been the authoritative leader, no matter how nice you've been, people will not feel comfortable bringing up problems to you or different solutions. They're going to sit back in their chair and go, hey, what do you think we should do? And in that case, I need to close my mouth. You need to close your mouth. And your job is to seek to understand what the rest of the people think before you ever offer an opinion. It feels like you're going really slow when you do this. But when you start to change from a full autocratic leader to this facilitated, things end up going so much faster, because when you realize the team helps you find out what you're wrong about now, when you realize that 6 months before you otherwise would, well, every one of those decisions gets pulled back. And so very quickly, you're 2 or 3 months out from this shift, and you have now realized things about your business, about the industry, about your clients, and you're where you knowledge-wise would be 2 years out through your old style. Well, so it may felt really slow for 6 to 8 weeks, but when you start changing this, now very quickly, you're years ahead of where you would have been.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were saying that the ability to accelerate and 10x your business is right there. The secrets lie in what you just said. So that is good. How do you deal with, and we're going to get to the 10xing, the practical outside, like in terms of operational things that you do in addition to what you just talked about. But before we do that, how do you deal with, do you deal with in this type of environment where you might have somebody who's like digging in their heels and they're saying, this is the way it should be, kind of like the autocratic leader coming from within the team. Do you deal with that? And if so, how do you address it?
Yeah, great question. In different ways. And so if it's on a one-on-one, it's a little bit easier some cases. If it's in a team environment, I'm usually going to actually stop the meeting and be like, hey, I think I know where you're coming from right now. And I may repeat that back, but I'll say, I want to hear from, and I'm going to almost make them be quiet. That's where I do step in with authority much more, so that we can make space for others on the team to offer their opinion. But then I'm going to go back to that person. If they have a strong opinion, I'm going to ask them, why do they believe that? What do they mean by that? Because so often somebody will, especially those that are really passionate, they're going to say something and you think you know what's in their mind. And so when you start to ask, well, what do you actually mean by that? And maybe you repeat back in a different way, and they'll go, that's not exactly what I mean. That's not what I mean. Then you're seeking to understand versus just steer them. And so that helps. And then especially if I disagree with them or have a different opinion, then I'm going to ask the third question, which is, have you considered? And I'm going to point out based on my experience where that's at. And those three things usually doesn't take the passion out, but it takes the tension out of the situation because they feel heard. And I'm going to remind them back as well. In some cases, I may have to go to a one-on-one afterwards, that we seek to make sure that everybody has a strong opinion, and that's great. But is it held loosely or not? Because you might be wrong. And so that's where, like, do you coach in front of everybody, or do you do it one-on-one? It really depends on the person.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to what you were talking about with leader, like being the leader and having people actually call you out on stuff. I love that. I actually had one of my mentors. I owned a franchise a number of years back and worked with Blair Singer. And that was one of the things, was part of our code of honor, to be willing to call it and be called. And it goes both ways. And I remember there was a point where I called Blair out on stuff and said, hey, and his partner, and I said, hey, that's not how we committed to doing things. And there was a level of freedom in that, to do that. How do you do that in an effective way, and teach people how to do that in an effective way, especially if they're coming from an environment where that's not allowed normally?
One-on-ones will often help because I can put together and be intentional on thinking through my questions to draw out uh, areas where basically I'm pushing them to critique me, whether my style or my opinions or approach. So that's one of the ways. The other way really is, as I mentioned, when I realize myself a decision that was the wrong decision, and now I know it's the wrong decision, and I bring that to the team. That's one place. But the other place is, so many people, especially if they come from that PTSD toxic environment, they will not call you out in front of others. And so you need to create an environment so that people can book time with you and do that one-on-one. And then, which I love, and I'll give them credit for that. Sometimes I use this service called Thanks, where like I'll send people like a little bit, like when they call me out, I will send them like something in the mail as well. So that's a good way for encouraging. But then I will often ask, if it's been done one-on-one, can I share this with the team? And then when there's an all hands meeting, I will bring out, hey, Nicole and I had this conversation and she called me out on this. And I was just going to bring that up. Like especially if I do realize I wasn't showing up well. I had a situation where I wasn't called out on it. I realized, as much as I like healthy confrontation, I had a leader at my last company, worked with him for 5 years. And I was about 90 days past when he did some things that was just irking me. And instead of bringing it to Ellen, I was letting it just simmer inside, and it was leaking out of my cup, spilling out in our interactions and team meetings. And it hit me, and I realized it, and I went to him. So we had the conversation. Like literally the next meeting was so much better because we diffused it. I then, on the next Monday meeting with everybody, I brought up and said, hey, this just happened. Like, we talk about healthy conflict. I got it wrong. And Alan didn't even bring it to me. I'm the one that had to go to him, ask for his apology. And some of you, and I gave some examples to him, like some of you have been in a few of these meetings where I was acting in ways I wouldn't want to show up in a normal meeting like that. And that's because I'm 90 days past when I should have brought this up to him. Man, 3 people reached out to set up meetings right afterwards with that.
Wow.
So,
Man, if we would do that in companies, just imagine what could shift. I love this. This is so good. This is gold. Seriously. And I know that you speak on this topic and do, coaching and so forth. And so actually it's a good opportunity right now, is where do people find out more about this? If they're going, man, I need to figure out how to do that in my organization. Like, Kurt, can you help me out?
yeah, my personal website is the best place. So Kurt Uhlir, UHLIR.com. If depending on what the organization is too, like you can also find me on the National Speakers Association. So those are great places to kind of find me then.
Okay. Let's talk about 10xing your business. So we've talked about the people aspect, getting the right people on the team, inviting them to be, taking action, offering their input. What are some of the other things that need to be present in order to 10x a business
Yeah,
and more? and more,
Yeah.
because I know you've
Yeah.
done a lot more than that.
I try unlocking hypergrowth. I've been part of two hypergrowth companies where I just stepped out of 3 years at a company that did not exist 15 years ago. And now they're a multi-billion-dollar public company, and the largest in their space in the world. And so that's what hypergrowth looks like. Well, not every company can do that. But when you start trying to figure out how do I not grow by 10% a year? How do I 10x it every year, every other year? Things change, but you also have to look at your business differently. And I love that. Well, I don't necessarily like labels or terms, but this shift from, you know, like KPIs for what are my key indicators to like OKRs. Here's the outcomes I'm wanting to accomplish. Here's the results we're trying to reach to. Like that's part of it. It's going really slow, but it was a lot more difficult 10 years ago. There's some awesome SaaS platforms. Like if you're a 50-person company, if you're a 5,000-person company, it takes a really long time to come in and make sure individual contributors understand the outcomes of the whole company's trying to reach and how their roles reach that. But there's a lot of tools now like 15.5 and Lattice that basically allow from the high level and everywhere down the organization to bring in that OKR kind of concept and say, hey, you're in customer success. You have a book of business. This is the outcomes we're trying to reach and how specifically your role helps us accomplish that, and facilitates the conversation between people in ways that, like, in the past, you'd have had to go bring in consultants for, 200 grand, 500 grand a year to do that. And it's like, somebody's running, a 30 truck electrical company. Like nobody has that time or the money. And now there's these great tools that's like, it's a couple of dollars a head count per month that help you really do that as a sole business operator.
That's cool. Yeah. And I've not heard of those tools, so that'll be good to check that out. So when you look at you alluded to it, there's a difference between 10xing your business or 10%ing your business
Right.
and exponential growth. As the leader, what do you need to be looking at with the economy changing and all the things going on, politically and so forth? What do you need to be focused on, keeping your focus on, so that you're not getting distracted? There's so many distractions out there, and
Right.
so many bright shiny objects. And so what do you need to be focused on, and how do you stay focused on that?
You really need to be focused on, it's a cliche, but not working on the core business. And so no matter the organization, like, what can you systematize and hand off to other people? That doesn't mean that you're not involved in decisions. I believe decisions should filter their way up, and that you should find out the decisions that were made. And you should always, depending on your level, have the ability to pull out that kind of trump card and go, I disagree with this. Let's go back and revisit it. Bring me on board or not. But I do believe, like, what most leaders don't do is, like, I love working. I love doing in growth marketing. I love getting in and actually doing campaigns. But I also believe that part of my job is to systematize and create SOPs, standard operating procedures, for everything that I'm doing. So that if I didn't show up for work for 6 months, somebody could pick things up and run. And that type of documentation is very different than what almost any organization has. When I do that, I'm able to actually start to hand off things to other people in my team. And then, based on my wisdom and my experience, mad scientist, the next level of growth. If you want to grow your business by 10% a year, keep doing your growth marketing campaigns, keep leading your sales team, and you'll grow a little bit. If you, though, have built up a company, you have an 8-figure business, and you've been doing a lot of the sales, what do you need to put in place so that you do zero of the sales over the next 12 months? And then go, okay, what would you now do to leverage the business and do things that only you can actually do? That true, hey, it's only something that Nicole can do. Well, I can net weave, and I can have discussions with people that could open up another 7 figures of revenue. That's not something that a normal salesperson might be able to do if I'm running an 8-figure business. But you or I could do that based on our relationships. And it's not going to lead to necessary sale tomorrow, but that starts to change things. Or, hey, I stepped in a company, we ended up selling to Oracle, and the marketing was going really well and growth was going really well. They'd raised $30 million right before they brought me on board. And I ended up being brought in to try a new way of marketing. And I came up with, instead of selling the features and the value, our CEO hated it at the time. I kept testing. Hey, wait a second. I went back to him. I said, I found a way, instead of getting like a 30% meeting set up and maybe a 50% close rate, then I can get an 85 to 90% meeting once I reach out, and almost 100% success rate. And he's like, that's what we're going to do. I'm like, you're not going to like it. I ended up basically shifting. It was early in social media management. And that was that time in 2010 where all sorts of companies like Samsung Mobile and Apple's and others were starting to schedule things on social media. And I said, I figured out that if I call the CMO, I call the head of marketing, I basically say, hey, Nicole, there's only two enterprise solutions. There's us and Buddy Media. I'm going to be by your office on Thursday. And I phrased it in a way, we iterated on it, but it was basically, if your general counsel and CFO finds out from a regulatory perspective that you didn't take my meeting, it might be your job. The meetings took place like that because they knew they had to choose a solution, and I was making it easy for you to kick the tires on one of them. The CEO hated it. And he goes, what do your numbers look like? And I showed him. He was like, go tell the outside sales team, we need to change.
So what I'm hearing also in this is it's the shift from I gotta know, I gotta have the answers. Like I'm talking about an overall perspective, right? It's the I've got to know, I've got to have the answers, I've got to do it, to how do we get this done?
Right.
And to really actually make yourself obsolete when it comes to systems, to the extent that you don't need to be there to make them happen, that you can focus on vision, you can clear your mind. I think that's the biggest challenge I hear. I know it for myself, and I know that for many of the people that I've worked with and or had on the show, is that they find themselves so buried under the day to day that they don't have, and or what's going on in the world, that they don't have the capacity to be able to envision beyond that, what's possible, the unprecedented future. They don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, so often I find today people are uncomfortable with quiet. They're uncomfortable without, like, we listen to podcasts and audiobooks at 2x and 3x speed, and something we always have to have stimuli coming in, and we've lost the ability to sit in our quiet and feel our emotions. And the emotions are really good in business because that gut feeling that says something's not right with our sales process, something's not right with, that's causing us to churn customers, that doesn't happen unless you have silence and you have emotions that starts to lead you to something. Sometimes the data will take you there, but usually you're going to have that feeling long before you start sniffing for the data. And so you have to have silence for that. And we have to train ourselves to focus. Those of us from a faith background, we've kind of bought into this quiet time, where quiet time means I'm listening to music to get close to God, or I'm reading, a small study. And that's okay, but that's not the old style quiet time. Old style quiet time also wasn't Eastern meditation, where you're trying to empty yourself. It was picking a single thing, a single verse, and meditating on that, and trying to center yourself on a single thing. Well, that teaches you to focus in a very different way than the way most of us are today. It's so awkward. I mean, my wife used to like laugh at me. We'd go for hikes when we were dating, and it's like I have a headphone in my ear listening to music or a podcast while we're walking in the woods. And she's like you're missing being here. And not just with me, you're missing this. And she's pointing out the mountains and things. And it was so awkward for me to do. But you're right. We need that to be able to, I joke, it's staring out the window time. The higher you go up in an organization, you either need to stare out the window or spend time with the people that are talking to your customers. So one of the reasons that I am where I'm at is because I joined this company I mentioned, Navtech Here Technologies, and I'm straight out of my master's. And I got kind of knighted by this gentleman named Judson Green. He had been the president of Disney theme parks. And he came to me, and he came to 9 other people in the organization. And after 2 years, there was only 2 of us left, and then quickly only 1 of us. And his kind of ethos was, look, I know that people don't like to share bad information up. And so Disney's are large organizations, as we all know. And he said, you're at the front lines. I will help you in your career, Kurt, but 2 things will take place. 1, if you tell anybody, including your spouse, about this relationship, and I find out about it, we're done. And 2, I may ask you for your opinion, but I really just want facts and data. And so your job is to convey that to me. And so most people, he said, that's been really hard. And so he did bring in a crop of another people, and he came to me, and I'd ask him, like, here's what I'm seeing. But he was trying to then figure out, hey, you're talking to customers, you're in these partnership deals. I need to know what's actually going on, because all of the salespeople, they're only sharing the good information up. And he goes, I can't make decisions. I don't know what questions to ask unless I know what's actually happening in those customer meetings.
So as we wrap up here, I would love to hear what your day looks like. Like,
I wake up at
what's your daily routine? Yeah.
I wake up at 3 to 3:40 most mornings, usually without an alarm clock. Spend a little time just quiet, the way I kind of talked about, and then I'm at the gym. I wish my gym opened up earlier, but the earliest they have a class is at 5:30. So that's that. I'm in with that. I have my daily activity. Come home and take a 1 mile walk with my 4-year-old because otherwise he's chaotic at school. And then I get into meetings with clients or working on projects right now with big companies.
Awesome. There's the secret to success is hidden in our daily routine, right? So that's why I asked that question is like all of these things that we've talked about are so important and valuable. And it comes down to what do we do every single day? And
Right.
even that gentleman that you were talking about that you worked with and that asked for that opinion, there was something, there's a routine, there's a certain habits. There's the habits, there's the patterns, there's the thought processes, there's the emotions, and how do we tap into that? All of those things which make up the recipe for success. And so I love this. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that we need to talk about when we're addressing this topic of really 10xing your business, but doing it from a servant with a servant leadership heart?
Yeah, the two parts that I have is, in addition to the daily routine, I don't do it daily, but I do at least a once a week, sometimes twice a week review of how I've spent my time. And I replay those meetings, especially the one-on-ones with people on my teams. That's very important for realizing, am I showing up and acting in that servant leadership and trying to find the best ways to serve people? So that's the biggest thing that I think the most important, because so often I fail at it and I don't have guilt about it. I give myself grace, as we all should, but it allows me to iterate and show up different the next week.
Yeah. So it's being honest with yourself. There's a level of self-awareness there and not getting too far. Again, another theme I hear is not getting too far down the road where you're like, oh my gosh, if I would have paid attention 6 months ago, I could have made the change and gotten a better outcome from there. So good.
Yeah.
Kurt, thank you. This has been fantastic. This, I think, is one of those interviews that people are going to want to re-listen to because there's so much packed into this. And we just so appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. And of course, we're going to make sure that your information is in the show notes and on the website and everything that people can connect with you. So it's kurtuhlir.com, and we'll make sure the correct spelling is there. So thank you again.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure. And I always say leaders of transformation take action. So you got a lot of information here, a lot of insight from somebody that has built multi-million dollar, billion-dollar companies. You know what? Take action on something. Maybe it is today taking that walk, that 1 mile walk with your son, or maybe it is reflecting and saying, hey, I need to look at the window and really just check in with myself, unplug, check in with myself. Or maybe it's talking to your team and saying, hey, you know what? I've been getting it wrong. I need to do something different. Whatever that is for you that stood out for you, do something about it today. Because if you don't do something about it today, it's going to get put off and put off. And 6 months later, you're going to be like, man, I should have done that. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories, how this has impacted you, and even tell us what is the thing that you're going to do today and that you're going to hold yourself accountable to. We'd love to hear that. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. You can, of course, reach out to us on social. We'd love to hear from you. And we look forward to seeing you next week for another episode of the Leaders of Transformation.